and you see you see it's counting, and that's going to stay on. Actually, that timer will stay on, so it'll be easier to track the time. And
I don't see any timer anymore, but
then I will just track the time the whole time. I'll be the tracker because I have it permanently in the top because I'm the one who's recording. Great. And I will start my recorder.
Great. I'm going to start my recorders. Oops, hang on. 1 second. I have to relaunch Audacity since it crashed. Pretty sweet.
Audacity is pretty buggy, but when it works, it's nice.
Agreed. Okay, I am now recording via Audacity, and I'm going to start recording. All right. I should be ready to go.
Oh, one other thing is, before I start, I'm going to pause for just 2 seconds so that we get like the dead air easy cut. And then when we pass the baton, like we should, the next thing the new host says should be continuous, but they should pause a few seconds just in case we cut a segment. That'll be a clean cut.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
But I didn't do it right there.
Yeah, that's fine. The pause starts now. Hello and welcome to a new and maybe short-lived, depending on how this goes, podcast called Zooming In. I'm one of your hosts, Carl Bialik, and with me is co-host David Goldenberg. Welcome, David.
Hello.
David and I went to college together. We've known each other almost 23 years, and we've worked together on something called Guelph Magazine, and this is a Guelph Magazine production. Guelph was started 15 years ago to look over the overlooked, and one of the features that Guelph and David, in fact, launched was Zooming In, a look at international news, of which there's plenty now. This podcast, Zooming In, is going to be a little different, but in that same spirit. Guelph has moved from publishing articles to live events to, as many live events have, the recording space that we're now in. And on this show, we're going to try out a format which may not outlive the pilot, which we all know from TV is a common phenomenon, but hopefully whether or not this format survives, the show will, and all of us will as well in this dire time. So on that happy note, I'm going to pass it along to David after I briefly explain the format before he actually tells us what the first topic is. So this is a show of segments, and we are going to be rating things. And those things are typically 1 or 2 words. Each of us in turn are going to choose something to rate for each segment, and we'll be the host of that segment. We'll both rate it at the start. We'll talk. We'll rate it at the end. And that's it. Nobody really wins. We all win. We all learn something or get mad at the host and send us angry emails. And, hopefully there'll be a way to learn something or just, talk shit, whatever. And we're going to move fast, and we're also going to dump the worst segment at the end. So hopefully what's left is going to be a snappy 5 segments on topics that both David and I have chosen. So I'm going to hand it over to you, David, with the first segment on the first topic. And for our notes, we've got 8 minutes to go.
Great. Thank you, Carl. I think that was a pretty good summary of what we're up to. So no matter how bad this is, know that something was worse that we've cut out. And also know that if Carl and I had a child when we first met, we would now have a very large adult son. So the first topic we're going to talk, I don't know, that's what people say.
Okay.
The first topic that we are going to talk about today is masks. And we are going to rate them on a scale. Let's start with a regular scale, a scale of 1 to 10. And I'm going to give masks a 6.
10 is better. Typical 1.
10 is better, yes.
Okay.
So, Carl, I would like you to also give me your rating of masks, and then tell me what you think I meant when I said masks.
Sure. I will rate it an 8. And since we're recording this on April 10th, 2020, soon after the CDC told people it was probably a good idea to wear a cloth mask because of the coronavirus pandemic, I think we're probably going to be talking about masks in the health context and not so much Purim or Halloween or hockey.
Excellent. I will say that I just had a nice Seder where we had the plague masks, which are very common to that. that time of year. I don't know if they had those back when you were a kid, but seeing as I have kids, my son actually had 10 different masks that he took on and off throughout the evening. But that is not what I thought it was either. Masks is all I also thought was not the medical grade like N95 masks, but the
If we were rating plague masks, it clearly would have been 10 because that's cute and because there are 10 of them. So since you gave us 6, I will assume we're not.
Fair enough. But yes, so I'm not talking about the medical grade masks. I'm talking about the sort of sewn or repurposed ones that makeshift masks, I guess, that the various authorities are now sort of telling us to wear, kind of. And I'll tell you why I think they are 6. I think there's, first of all, I like to signal that I care about what's going on in the world, and wearing one of these things around when I go out makes me feel like I'm virtue signaling to everyone, which I think is great. And also, I have a bunch of these sort of, I think they're called buffs, which are sort of like socks without the feet on them, that you can put over your neck, like balaclavas almost for the winter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like a tube of cloth.
And it's not a good look for me normally, so I don't ever wear them. And so now I can wear them, and I've taken them out of the pile of things that I don't wear. So I like them a lot.
Hoarding is justified like that.
Exactly.
It's worth it this time.
And the minus is that I have no idea if it's actually helpful or not, and I don't know if, like, is a mask only good if I'm willing to wash it, for instance. And I was a mask, and like, if I don't wash it when I take it off, is it better to not wear a mask or wear that same mask that I just wore out and was touching my face with all the time? And so I have some anxiety associated with wearing it, but overall, it's slightly better to have one than not. So 6 out of 10. What about you, Carl?
All of that sounds reasonable. Since we're on video, by the way, if you have any of these masks you mentioned handy, that would, grab it while I talk if you want. One of the things I think about a lot from a career working with data and statistics is uncertainty. That's part of any quantitative analysis. And I think it's been so helpful for me to cope and think during this time for myself and for what I think when other people ask me or just when I'm forming opinions about the world. And I also, as a personal credo, think inaction is a choice too. So, I think we should have been anxious too when we weren't wearing masks. I think right now, if you go out, I'm curious, when you do go out, you live in San Francisco, I'm in New York.
Yep.
Or when you look out your window or whatever, roughly what percentage of people do you think are wearing masks, whether cloth or, just something that's clearly for avoiding infection?
So in San Francisco, there's a huge dichotomy, which is that there's 2 types of people. There's the people that go out for supplies, and then there's the people that go out to exercise. The people that exercise, it's about 20% of people wear masks and 80% don't. And the people that are going out for supplies, basically there's a store right around the corner from me that's got a line of people up the block towards me every day. And I would say somewhere between 80 and 90% of them are wearing masks, and I would say a lot of them are wearing gloves and stuff as well. So I think that it really depends, but overall, I would say, I was trying to explain this to my wife the other day, which is that I think that close to 75% of people wear masks when they leave the house, but only about 50% of the people that I see outside are wearing masks, because the people that don't wear masks go out so much more often than the people that don't.
Yeah, and to clarify, some of these are the same people. Some people jog without a mask because it's hard to breathe and run with the mask, and then would put it on maybe to go for supplies. Although you and I before have talked about how, right, those are the 2 types of people going out, and another way of saying it is they're the people who need to go out, and they're the people who don't but still choose to. And that second group, on average, no offense to exercisers, I love exercising, they're going to on average take this less seriously and care less. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going out, because other exercisers who aren't as much. So it's kind of a self-selecting bunch. Kind of makes sense. Plus, it's harder to do exercise with masks on. So, I give it an 8, maybe even higher, just because there's so much uncertainty swirling around here. And everything we've heard stated as definite, I think, is essentially a lie. And it might be a white lie. I'm not sure there is such a thing, but, many people do think so.
Do you think there was intentional deception by the government to tell us not that we didn't need to wear masks, so that the masks didn't all get hoarded?
I think there was intentional deception. I think there were multiple motivations, many of them good ones. One of them was masks being hoarded. Although I will note, as someone who has bought masks years ago, because I was going to go out to visit you and other people and work in San Francisco during wildfire season. So I owned masks. The messaging was to me the worst of both worlds. It was like shaming people like me who happened to own some and hadn't just gone and bought them without any actionable item of like what to do with these things. It wasn't like, bring them to your lobby or go to this office and drop them off. It was just like you should donate them. But the last thing I would want to do is have them not go to good use because a hospital gets them and says this box has been opened or these are old. We're just going to toss them. I mean, that doesn't help anyone. So I think that was one motivation, was to make sure masks got to doctors. But I think that was very fuzzy and poorly communicated and backfired anyway, just from a tactical point of view, because if you tell people that they're helpful for medical workers and that medical workers need them because they might be around sick people, anyone who might be around sick people would think it would be helpful for them. Mm-hmm. I also think there was a lot of fear of like the rebound effect, kind of people would put on masks and then take other risks, but we don't not tell people to wash their hands or to avoid sick people because we think they'll do a bunch of other risky stuff. And there was also just uncertainty around the science, but I haven't seen any credible science saying masks are bad. And we're giving people prescription drugs we don't even know are, safe and effective because that might be the best chance we've got. So I personally would have made a very big different decision, and I think there's enough circumstantial evidence from other countries in this pandemic and also from previous ones that cloth masks probably do help. I just spoke a bunch and we're actually out of time. So in the interest of sticking to format, you can always find excuses to mention masks and follow up on these things later, including, I'm guessing, as the next host, the next segment. But what's your final grade?
I'm gonna bump up my final grade to a 7 out of 10. What about you?
I'm going to bump it up to a 9 because I convinced myself so much and just to keep the gap. I mean, of course, it could be totally differently calibrated. I might just be a generous grader. I got to leave room for the really great. Okay, my turn. School. What's your grade? We're going to do this because it's school on the letter grade system. Use your pluses and minuses as you wish.
Excellent. I'm going to give school an A-.
I'm going to give it a D.
Wow. All right, we got some stuff to talk about. So here's why here's what I thought we were talking about before we get into the details, which is the idea that I could take my kids to a physical school and then not have to see them again until later in the afternoon. That in hindsight was pretty much the best thing ever. And then I'm not thrilled with
how
school.
Kids.
I love my children, but oh my God. But the fact that that school is, I'm learning now, even though they're probably getting the same amount of information, it's not the actual school. It's school as a daycare center or a place where I can remove my children from my my purview for a while.
Yes. Okay. And that's, I mean, I shouldn't undervalue that. So I was thinking of school in all its aspects, including what you just described, and also, higher education as well. So not just for kids, but just learning in general, and also school as sort of credentialism, which I think is very big now. So when we talk about masks or other parts of the science of the coronavirus, there's a lot of like, what is your specialty and what school do you teach at, or what school did you go to? So to take your first point though, I think it's wonderful that schools do that. I think that's not what a school is. And I think calling it a school, and then in New York City's case, waiting probably too long to close down schools because it turns out our society creates institutions and then either hollows them out or uses them for something else because of how poorly equipped we are to take care of people. That's not school. Yeah, they're great for daycare. They're great for feeding kids who need feeding. They're not even great, but they're better than the alternative, which is to not do that. And I think this helped clarify that and expose that. And I want those things to happen and happen more, but I think we should call them what they are then.
And what would you call them?
Daycare center and food banks. Now, I wouldn't only call them that. There is some attempt to educate, of course, and there even is now, even if because school isn't the building, it's the institution. I think we both agree on that. And I know your kids are, having video classes of varying success, and I want to hear how that's going. I think that part of what's on my mind lately, partly influenced by an essay by Paul Graham that I read this week, is just how much school teaches us to follow rules and also to optimized for tests and not for true learning, and how that is. He wasn't writing about how it's backfiring now, but I've been thinking a lot about how it's backfiring now. But yeah, how do you feel about any of that, including the educational point of view for what your kids are experiencing remotely?
Yeah, so I will say that there is a really interesting thing that's happening with the kids' school, which is that they finally got set up with Google Classroom and Zooms with their classes and things like that. But they only get roughly like a couple hours of work a day or babysitting a day out of it, as far as I'm concerned. And then the rest of the time, it's basically I found other teachers like our good friend Dino, who's interested in the math educational system, who literally teaches my kids, like ridiculously hard math for a couple hours a week. My mom's teaching them about anatomy, my brother's teaching them about birds, my dad does the crossword puzzle with them. Like all of these things are I think just as valuable, if not more valuable, than what they're getting out of the school. And for me, the valuable thing is that I can leave them for an hour to do this stuff. But I also think there's lots of things they could be interested in, and that the absurdity of the second and fourth grade curriculum at in San Francisco public schools is becoming even more absurd as I see that there's the whole world out there for them to learn based on just the random things that my family members are interested in.
Yeah, I mean, one of the phenomena I think we're all experiencing in different ways is realizing that when suddenly the in-person experience isn't available, which is clearly a downgrade in just about every respect in our lives, suddenly that means all the other things that never could be in person because they're remote are competing and often beating the thing that has suddenly become remote itself. So, I'm all like the educational program and set of teachers you put together for your kids is amazing. And I know a lot of other parents who are trying to do likewise. But that's not really, I mean, that's like homeschool turbocharged with, the world of your contacts available to you.
Right.
So it's like a new school you're inventing or something. And it's also kind of surfacing another potential weakness of traditional school, which is all the teachers have the same profession, teachers, and they have the same similar training. I mean, some of them have come from other professions, and I love teachers and I love many of them, but like that's the thing they do is like work for a school, whereas your kids are now learning from people with all different kinds of ways of thinking and talking and seeing the world and explaining it. And I mean, that just sounds incredibly valuable. I'm also curious how valuable you think play is, because play can often be a very limited part of traditional school, but from what I hear from other parents, like when kids are home all day, play ends up happening quite a bit. And I think we both think you can learn quite a bit from play.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that there is play is, sorry, it's echoing real quick. There's for me, there's this idea that play is like, there's two types of play. There's play like something that I approve of, and play like screen time, basically. And so the idea that I think it sucks for my kids right now that they have to play with each other all the time, right? They have all these other friends that they want to spend time with, and they like each other, they tolerate each other better than most siblings do, but for them, play, I think, was this sort of outlet of creativity and zaniness that's really hard to do when you're going to get criticized by your sister for it, and so I feel like that has been lost a little bit. But then also their play, like they play Minecraft and they're like playing with my sister and friends that they found, and it seems like incredibly actually creative, and not something I was willing to let them try before, because it's screen time and they get addicted to it. And Joseph will tell me that he's like dreaming about Minecraft blocks so when he wakes up in the morning and stuff like that, and I'm like, that's probably not a great thing, but it's also like, I figure if they don't play more than like 14 or 15 hours a day of it, like it's fine.
Yeah, and there are careers in these things, so
That's true.
And those careers are looking better than traditional sports these days. All right, we're almost out of time. Just to briefly make my point on credentialism, it's probably fairly obvious. I just think that, to reinforce my uncertainty point from before, experts do not know that much right now that they are quite sure of, and also I think have botched a lot of the communication. And there's been a lot of appeal to authority, and there's also been a lot of evidence that people take suggestions super literally And like once somebody tells them to shelter in place, even if it was obvious they should have been, because other states were, that's when a lot of them act. Once people tell them to wear a mask, that's when a lot of them act. When people tell them 6 feet of space is enough, they measure out exactly 6 feet on the sidewalk. And I think a lot of that comes from belief in people's credentials and also from all of us being grown-up children. And when we were children, we were told what to do and we did it. So what's your final grade for school?
I am going to bring it down slightly to a B+ because you made me think about homeschooling and how terrible that is. So I'm bringing it slightly down. What about you?
I'm going to take a wider view of school because I think what you've created at home is pretty cool, even if it sucks for you. And so I'm going to give it a C+. You're up.
All right, excellent. Okay.
Let's pause for a second.
Oh, sorry. Excellent. All right. My topic now is Netflix. And I am going to why don't you tell me your rating first? I'll tell you my rating, which is I give it a thumbs up and an add it to my queue.
Yeah. Same. So we're done. Great. Next topic.
So tell me, Netflix, what are you currently watching? And
so maybe this one we don't even need to define because it is a proper noun, but I think we're talking generically about streaming, watching videos in all forms, including live events, quote unquote. That's what we're talking about.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
So I have not watched nearly as much as I expected to. I've been busier and just like spending more time reading when I'm not busy or listening to music or cooking. But I've loved knowing that so much is available. And it's definitely part of what's given me so much empathy for 1918ers going through something like this. Along with just, being able to connect with other people by video, which is a different kind of streaming, but you can often do on the same device. So to be more specific, Weed Ray started The Good Place. We finished that, which felt very topical.
I bet.
And then we're mostly done with Unorthodox and just like kind of one-offs here and there. A lot of, the videos that have been coming out. There was the John Krasinski, The Good News, which has a surprise relating to the show Hamilton that I recommend, and other videos people have sent. And friends of mine have been using Facebook Live in really creative ways. So I've been watching that, and sometimes have that on just in the background to like hear a friend's voice while I'm working. And so yeah, it's been all positive. How about you?
So I think that this has been an interesting thing to sort of really like interrogate why I watch what I watch when online, which is that normally I'm basically optimizing for relaxation and for a shortness so that I can like put the kids to bed, sit on the couch, do this and that, but without being like a real commitment, right? So I really like to rewatch like The Office or rewatch The West Wing or something like that, where I can hop in and out and still enjoy it, but not have to process anything really new. And one of the really interesting things to me has been like you were saying you watched Unorthodox, the story of the Satmar sort of Jewish community in Brooklyn, and I would never have watched that
because it doesn't fit the bank for buck. Half a brain Goldenberg algorithm.
Exactly, and it's fascinating.
Not that you have half a brain, you know what
I mean. We'll review that later on, but I think that there is it's been really freeing to see that there's this whole that I didn't even realize this, but that there's this whole section of video content that's out there that's great that I would never have considered before. And so I've been a huge fan of sort of letting myself get into that. And some of that is like watching terrible kids TV shows with my kids that I would never have tolerated because it's such a waste of time. And they're so bad, but it's also like, even in really bad stuff, like it's exciting to like watch why it's bad and stuff like that. I never would have had time for that. But like the Garfield show is the absolute worst TV show that's ever been made. And it's my son's favorite show right now. And so, but I watch a good 20 minutes every day, and it's bad in so many interesting ways that it's like, I don't know, it's fascinating.
Well, I think one of the things that has always bonded us is if we have any skills that are sort of better than average, it's probably one of them is probably like finding interest and joy even in things that are bad, like being able to see what's interesting and worth learning from it, even if it's like cautionary tale type learning. So I think that helps. Although there are some shows that somebody else living in my apartment likes to watch that all I learn is that she doesn't like it when I criticize her show while she's watching, which seems like a reasonable response. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's really like one indicator of how just clearly good this is, at least from the point of view of us, the consumer, maybe not the point of view of the makers and the the longstanding businesses that are upended that employ a lot of great people and have made a lot of great things. But from the point of view of users, like just having so much choice, so much competition, so much information about what you might like, having everything just come right to your screen when you want it. Like, we're old enough to remember when that was not the case and to appreciate it. I think the indicator for me is that if there ever feels like it's a bad thing, it's that there's too much to watch and that you feel the way you might feel if you love the New Yorker but hate the pile of New Yorkers piled up in your home. I think I've gotten better about kind of letting that go. And I think I need to get even better about letting shows go. So for instance, I watch Westworld, my fiance doesn't, and I'm not caught up. I'm still in season 2 because we don't watch it together. So it's hard to find time to watch. And I should probably just let that one go because I could. It's not amazing all the time. So I think like adjusting our habits to where if you give up a show back in the day, now you don't have anything to watch on Thursday nights. Now you have an infinite variety that's probably full of things that you would like better if you only tried them. I should probably jump around more. That's the only thing that would make me want to maybe that I could grade higher for it, I guess.
Yeah. I have the opposite problem, which is that there are a lot of shows that I kind of liked, but I dropped off of a few years ago because, it was either too intense and I didn't, want to watch it, or we were kind of like meh, or we didn't have time, basically. And now I want to go watch those shows again. But I don't know if I should start them over completely or if I should try to pick them up where we left off or some sort of middle ground. And so I don't know if Netflix
That's like true with books too, right? Have you ever like put down a book for a year? What the hell do you do?
Exactly. So I wish that there was some sort of like algorithm that prediction algorithm that'd be like, you watched it to season 2, episode 3. You should start over at season 1, episode 7, and just go from there. And so
for like beautifully produced 10% recap, right? Like condense all the shit that ran already, so you find out what happened.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
So we're pretty much out of time on this one. We started pretty positive. Is there like a more positive Netflix punny rating we can give it, or should we just leave it where we began?
The one thing I would change about Netflix is that I want a different recommendation queue. I am not the same David I was pre-pandemic. And so I want to recommend new stuff that the new David will enjoy, or at least enjoy thinking about while watching. And so I'm going to keep my rating of a thumbs ups and add it to my queue, but I wish that queue was slightly broader than it used to be.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Although people are very happy to share their recommendations now in a more old-fashioned way. So I've been getting a lot of tips that way instead of from the algorithm.
Very nice.
All right, next segment, my turn, words. And we're going to rate this on a scale from A to Z. Seems appropriate. Or maybe apple to zoo, because those are words. What's your rating?
I'm going to give words an umbrella. No, wait, a unicorn.
Nice. I'm going to give it a David.
Excellent. And Z is the best here, right? Zoo is the best here?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. It's confusing, actually, because I guess letter grades in school are the opposite. Yeah, Zoo is the best. It's like 1 to 26, but in word form.
So D is pretty terrible in both of these things, right?
Yeah, David is great, but D is bad. That's true. D is sort of where they cross. Okay, so what do you think we're talking about here?
I don't know. I have no words for this. I don't know what we were talking about. If we're just talking about lexicality in general,
good word.
I am into logorrhea and verbosity and all sorts of things. So Yes, I'm a big fan. What are you talking about?
We're talking about the same thing. I'm talking about the way we all use words to represent things. That's just what words are supposed to do. Things could be conceptual or tangible. I'm not a linguist, so if you're listening and you are, you know, skip this part. But that's the point. That's why we talk and write. Um, Sometimes we're deliberately trying to be obscure and obfuscating, but generally we're using them to communicate with each other. And I am often frustrated by how much people's implicit definitions of things differ from each other's and how little people seem to appreciate that possibility and take steps to ameliorate it. And that seems to be biting us in the ass right now. And I'm thinking I can tick off a lot of words, but I mean, just to name a few that have been thrown around a lot: panic, hoarding, shutdown, quarantine, you name it. I just think that people are using words they've never used before. They don't really know what they mean. And so inevitably they're using them in different ways. And there are major personal and public health implications. And never have words let us down so much without getting the blame I think they should.
That's fascinating. I will say that I think that there is two things here. One is likely to get this segment cut because my wife will not want it here. And the other one is that I'll start with the one that won't, which is that
Hi, Sarah.
Is that I make videos for a living, right? And so we combine a script and illustrations, and realizing that even when we agree on a script, we don't often, the members of my team don't often agree what the illustration should be that go along with that.
That's fascinating.
Makes me realize that yes, words are way vaguer than they should be, and that there really is a picture is worth lots of words sort of thing. But it's also that even lots of words is a very different picture to different people, and that is to me at least sort of gets at the second part. Sorry, Sarah, which is that like Sarah and I, like, we've known each other for almost as long as I've known you, Carl, and we're always on, we get along very well when we're on the same wavelength often. Yet we'll have a conversation, and that conversation will consist of 20 words, and we'll have interpreted each of those words differently from each other. And it's not with any malice or forethought, at least not on my part, Sarah, but it is it means that like this is like, it would be so much better if we just did Pictionary back and forth or something, because it doesn't work very well. And you're right that when we talk about the words in the pandemic, which I can't bring myself to say COVID, like
same
part of conversation yet.
I'm going with the virus often.
Yeah, and the virus actually sounds pretty cool, like as words go, not as like a thing, but that sounds like a nickname you'd try to cultivate when you were in on a sports team or something. But the pandemic, like most of the words that come out of my mouth these days when I'm trying to explain what I think about the things feel like not natural at all, and not like and that probably means, as you were saying, that most people don't know what I'm talking about.
Or they think, and they think they do. And I mean, I think you're bringing it back to like personal relations is so important too. I can think of work meetings and personal meetings, and I think it's not about you and Sarah having any particular disconnect, but just that any pair of people do, and you have most of your or the plurality of your conversations with her. I've thought about this from a journalistic perspective, and when you describe making videos, those videos are journalism of a sort as well. And I think that there are words that journalists use that they just don't even stop to think about. And to get back to things that maybe Sarah wouldn't like to hear, I think medicine often uses words that don't mean what regular people would think they mean. So, we've heard about mild coronavirus cases, and you hear from the people who had those mild cases, and it's not what lay people would call mild. It's just less severe than the really severe ones, which can kill you. Mm-hmm. We keep hearing about like the number of people in the hospital as equivalent to the number of people who required hospitalization, and requiring hospitalization is always going to be a probabilistic concept. I mean, I guess not always. If someone's been shot, everyone would agree they need hospitalization, I hope. But Otherwise, it's always going to be like, I mean, we're 90% sure, 10% sure, and those numbers are going to shift depending on resources and demand. And it's really euphemistic to pretend that everyone who's hospitalized requires it and everyone who isn't doesn't require it. That's just not how it works.
Right.
And never before has that mattered so much because in New York, we're saying, you know, this many people have required hospitalization and died of coronavirus when it's been established in so many ways that lots of people are not seeking medical attention or not getting it when they seek it and dying at home way more than usual. Did they require hospitalization? Yeah, I think so. Did they get it? No. And that's one of the reasons I like to say the virus. I think we should use simpler language that is more likely to be understood and still take pains to make clear what we're trying to say.
Yeah, I think that if we said the virus all the time when we were talking about stuff, because I think people have a tendency to try to soften things and make them more euphemistic and stuff. And the virus sounds evil. There's a big sign on the antique shop near me that says closed because of the virus. And that hits me a lot more than like in these trying times, or whatever.
Yeah, it's dark. Although, sometimes we should not scare people, but appropriately get their reaction. I also think euphemisms just like cliches, they sort of lose their purpose pretty quickly. Think of like your association with a correctional institute or a detention center. You just think that's a really institutional way of hiding the fact that you're talking about a prison. You're still picturing a prison. I don't think any other ways we talk about what's happening now by this stage are really softening the blow for anybody.
Let me put in a plug for words to explain how I got to my underlying unicorn, which is that I think that it is we've been basically tried to convince people, hundreds of millions of people to voluntarily, well, at least initially, put themselves inside a house and do something that they would normally never ever do, and that the power of the right words from the right people can have to do that. And maybe that's a bad thing sometimes, but in this case I think it's hugely important to be able to communicate effectively and clearly. And yes, like there were a lot of these curves that were drawn that people don't actually understand, but that's almost like a symbol that you can pass around, being like, okay, I'm in the know, like flatten the curve, whatever that means, but that is to me, that was like one of the most impressive mass mobilizations in history. And now I think that was mostly because of effective communication. And most of that was because we were using our words to scare people appropriately.
I give way more credit to people and way less credit to words. And I think better words would have saved more lives. But we're out of time. So I'm going to move my grade up because you are a very persuasive person, from David to Goldenberg. How about you?
Excellent. I am going to keep my letter at U, but I'm going to change it to Unabomber to say that maybe this is not that words can sometimes be really bad. No, let's not do that. Let's come up with a different U. Ungreat.
Undertaker. No, that's pretty dark. Ungreat is good. All right, you're up, David.
Okay, the next topic is projects, and I'm going to give projects 3 out of 5 stars.
5-star rating system, that's never going to catch on. I'm going to go with, we can do half stars, right? Any 5-star rating system would have half stars, yeah. I'm going to go with 4.5.
Ooh, exciting. Okay, so let me tell you what I was thinking about. I was thinking of DIY projects, things you do at home to sort of amuse yourself when you have less going on than usual, or some of the things that you like to do you can no longer do because you're trapped at home. And so what I was thinking of in particular is that I got very inspired to build a piece of exercise equipment for my children and me, which
and
is
then
basically
you found out the exercise equipment was building you.
It was a box for this thing called like a box jumper. You just jump up onto the box. So the box had to be sturdy. And it was great in that it took 3 days to make a frickin' box, which normally would be bad, but it gave me something to do for 3 days. You can often you listen to music and do things like that. I got to go down into my basement, which I very rarely do. And the the box was not cheap though. The piece of plywood that I built the box out of was cheap, but then I realized along the way that I needed better tools, and so I ended up spending several $100s on this box.
Which pales
And
relative to the time of 3 days, by the way.
True. And then I brought the box upstairs, and both of my children immediately split their shins open on the box that I had created for them. So
you're at 3 stars?
It was really fun to spend 3 days building a box, by the way. And then I got to add foam all around it, which was really exciting. Maybe I should have thought about that originally, but nonetheless, I got to. It was like a crafting. Yeah.
So I think I was thinking in a similar vein. I think probably in large part because I'm so much less handy than you, which is something we've discovered before on projects, and probably a function partly of where you grew up and partly a function of my innate like inability to look at something and then make my body do the same thing, like creating chairs and stuff. We did build a few things, but they were much easier to build, I'm sure, just like furniture, cheap furniture for sort of makeshift offices. But I'm thinking of projects more abstractly where it doesn't have to be physical, it doesn't have to be handy. And I
You're
think
saying it could be like a podcast or something like that?
Well, I wouldn't give this one 4.5. No. This is 5 stars for sure. I think this is a great example, but I mean, just think of like the lack of friction to get to where we are right now, where we already have this award-winning first episode that, has really changed the course of history. We started talking about this 6 days ago, I think, and talked about it a couple more times by email and video, and like, here we are. Now, we could have done this before. This is a project we could have pursued, but like it does because of that same phenomenon I was talking about before. Hopefully in a segment we don't cut it, because no longer would it be such an advantage to go do it with the person who lives real close to me, because they're just as far from me effectively. I can think, oh, I really like talking to Dave, and instead of waiting for every few months we're in the same city, we could just do it more often and do it now. So this is an example, just to tick off a few other sort of non-physical DIY projects that I've been thinking about or starting. I've in the past started recording older relatives, kind of their history, their memories, their thoughts. And that's something I can continue doing now. And it's a way to keep in touch with my parents. And what are the other examples? I've been thinking about starting a newsletter. I mainly just send it to myself. I don't know who else would want to get it, but I'm kind of intrigued by the form, and it's like a great time to spend an hour playing around with the different technology. I've longer term projects. I'm interested in like creating a walking route around the waterfront in New York City. Yep. And I can't do that so easily, but I can stare at maps a lot and do research on like the history of it. And I won't bore people with all of my projects because, well, not quite as boring as your own fantasy baseball teams. It's still kind of boring, but like, and certainly not a box. But yeah, I think that it's a great time from my point of view to choose projects that you can quickly abandon if they're not going well and switch to different ones, or keep going until you split your kid's shins. It's really 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Well, I think that there's this, you're saying there's like that, often an opportunity cost associated with starting a project that has been way lowered now, at least in terms of like, almost like we were talking about earlier, if that segment exists, is like starting a new TV show was almost a project for me where I was like, I'm only gonna do this if it's a quick in and out sort of thing. And now I'm feeling like inspired to take up things that would normally, take a little bit longer to do than normal. So like I want to, I've always wanted to know how to do a Rubik's Cube, but I can tell online that it's going to take me roughly 8 hours to learn to do that. And that's a project that's been too big for me to sort of wrap my head around before. But now I'm like, I mean, we can check back in next time we talk, but I feel like that's something I can do now in a way that, this is really sad to say out loud, but that it's always occurred to me that 8 hours is too much to devote to something that like I'll be marginally proud of,
It's about the journey.
That's right. But I'm 3 days proud of a box that can split my kid's shins open. So
is part of the negativity here any sort of guilt? I mean, you and I are going to be probably in the top 2 or 1% luckiest people right now in terms of being set up to handle this. We're not in the, I don't think we're in that percentile of wealth, but in terms of non-financial wealth and resources and experience staying at home, we've just got 30 seconds, and it's a big question to ask you. But do you feel any of that with these projects?
Sure. We'll mask my laziness with guilt, and say that that's part of it. Although I do think that there is for me, it's that I spend a lot of my time looking at death tolls from COVID and, what are various impacts doing. I feel like I need to know all the news about it. And because I feel guilty if I don't know all the news about it for some reason, and that eats up a lot of time that I'm not doing anything about it. I just am learning about it. And I feel like if I was doing things that I enjoyed more, then I would have less time for that. And then I would feel guilty about that. What about you?
I mean, I generally think guilt isn't a very useful feeling, but that doesn't mean I can completely banish it. But I also am a firm believer that if you have privilege and all you do is feel guilty about it, then that's not helping anybody. It's just a big waste. So I'm trying to think of projects that would be helpful for other people and that I would enjoy, which is kind of a specific example of a general philosophy, and so that makes me feel better about it. But I am going to come down, now that we're back to regrading, I'm going to come down to 4 stars because I didn't consider the great physical risk of projects. How about you?
Well, I'm going to come up to 4 stars as well because I know the great physical risks of projects and I still enjoy them a lot, and I'm inspired to do even more of them.
And just in case people are scared, the kids are okay, right?
The kids are all right. They're fine. They were a little confused as to why I would build them a death trap, but they've recovered, and the box itself is now covered, so we're good.
Nice. All right, I have the privilege of the last segment, if it stays. And for this segment, we are going to talk about insurance. And if I'd done more research, I would know exactly that they're probably different tiers and whatever, and that would have been funny, but I don't. So we're going to go with major and minor league baseball league system. And even though you're not as big a baseball fan as me, I think you know how the system works. Majors are the best. Let's go down to like the independents as the worst.
Even though I love,
yeah, exactly. So where does insurance rank for you?
I'm going to give insurance as single A ball.
Single A, okay. I was gonna go majors, like the majors in a major way. So what are you thinking of when you rate it pretty low on the scale?
I am thinking of the fact that insurance and just insurance paradigm in general is has been exposed as a total fucking fraud throughout this, and that our attempts to paper over that with whatever throughout the years, and that we has basically all of that has been ripped apart right now, and we can see that the insurance system that we currently have in the United States, even the car insurance system, doesn't make any sense when circumstances change drastically. But certainly health insurance, where 20 million people just lost their jobs and now they lost their health insurance in the middle of a pandemic. Like, I don't want to sound like a Bernie bro, but you know what I mean. Like, it's crazy.
Do we have to say that people who want people to have health care are Bernie bros? Is that where we are now?
That is the new normal. No, I think that the reason that I have to put it that way is that I think that you and I are 2 white dudes talking on a podcast, and so it would be assumed that we are Bernie bros to begin with. And I just want to point out that I'm not one, even though I do agree that
2 white dudes talking on podcasts right now about how great Trump is. So I wouldn't. Most white
Fair
dudes.
Enough.
So I think this, like, maybe I'm returning to the same themes too much in different segments, but I was thinking of insurance as the word really means, and not insurance that we've now sullied by naming things insurance that aren't insurance. Mm-hmm. I will go on, but I was curious about your comment about car insurance. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean about car insurance is that right now nobody's driving their cars, right? And nobody is, deaths from car crashes and things like that are happening much lower than they normally do. But some of these insurance companies are now like, oh, you can get a small discount on your car insurance as a result of this. But the idea that it's not tied to risk in any real way is silly to me, right? Like, it should be like, okay, well, there's a 95% less chance you're going to get in a car wreck this week because there's 95% fewer cars or whatever. Therefore, we're going to give you like a bunch of your money back. Like that doesn't seem to. They don't seem to relate it unless it gets to the risky side of things, which is, I guess, good for them as a company. But
I mean, I'm sympathetic, but I can think of to me, it's the exception when in capitalism a company is like, oh, it turns out you got a bad deal for reasons we couldn't anticipate, so here's some money back. I mean, most landlords are not forgiving rent, including to businesses that are not using the space they're renting. This is just the world we live in. And in some ways, to me, insurance is the more general concept that car insurance, health insurance, and so on is supposed to represent. And it's also the hedging of the insurance. I mean, there's a whole reinsurance industry. And maybe if car usage and risk is variable, there should be a way for you to buy a policy to hedge so that if you're using your car much less, you get money back to cover the fact that you're still paying for car insurance. I mean, the insurers who are responsible have their own reinsurance so that if people had actually bought pandemic insurance, which I don't think that many did, they wouldn't necessarily go out of business because of the reinsurance, which kicked in, for instance, with 9/11 with the giant risk. So to me, I guess the concept is proven as important as ever, and the execution is shown to be more flawed than we ever realized, at least in this country. I don't really know that much about what's happening elsewhere outside of the way other countries do healthcare insurance in the low I sense, where everybody has it because everybody has healthcare. I do know that Wimbledon had pandemic insurance and is supposed to get a $141 million payout, and that looks pretty smart. And I bet 6 months ago it looked pretty stupid, and someone really wanted to eliminate that line item and probably was complaining why, the equivalent of the car insurance complaint. The one other point I want to make here, because I'm trying to use the word in its most general form, which is how do we make preparations so that we are protected in case of unexpected events. And I was really bothered by the use of hoarding and panic buying around supplies. To me, that is insurance. If I have space in my home for something that I'm afraid I will run out of when it's dangerous to go to a store, even if the store is still open, there's no other insurance for me for that. Nobody's going to come bring me food to my apartment. Nobody's going to come bring me toilet paper. And we exist in a system where if something is for sale and you can buy it, you're allowed to buy it. It's not my fault. I shouldn't be shamed and blamed. Let's blame the system that couldn't figure out how to keep people supplied with the things they need. And I've been really appalled at how quickly people have jumped to call people pretty awful things for doing completely sensible things to basically insure themselves.
I disagree with you pretty wholeheartedly there in that I think that I'm not a prepper in any way, shape, or form. I don't actually know anything, but there is this sense that prepping is okay, right? You can be prepared for a major thing, but if you're in the middle of this major thing, we know that the thing that gets blocked up quickest is supply chains, and that, or not even supply chains. I don't even know what it's called, but the reason we want to flatten the curve is so that the hospital system isn't overwhelmed. The reason that we want to only buy one roll of toilet paper at a time is so that the stock isn't overwhelmed, right? And so I think that telling people that that they are that they're what they consider to be their insurance is a bad thing is okay, because it is I'm big into the whole greater good thing, and I think that people have to stick their butts in the sink or whatever to wipe for a while. That's fine.
We all are, by virtue of being home and doing what we've done to way reduce the toll. I don't think it's any of our jobs to do that. We don't make people choose not to be hospitalized when there's no room for them. We turn them away. Stores have limited how many rolls they'll sell or how much food they'll sell. It's up to the businesses and to the government to take steps quickly, which they certainly can do. And it's not if 90% of people voluntarily submit to the greater good and the other 10% buy everything, 90% of people did the right thing and got fucked. And that's a dumb system. We're out of time. Where do you come out now on insurance?
Well, because the word insurance seems to mean both the opposite of what I think it means and what I think it means, we'll compromise and say, why don't we say 2.5 A ball?
2.5. half stars and half A's. Yeah, I'll meet you partway. I'll come down to AAA. I think but I think, maybe the point is that a lot of things mean the opposite of what they mean to some people. I think we're out of time, and this is the moment where we can talk about, do we want to drop a segment, which is going to be really fun if we decide we do, because then no one will hear it. Although we'll save it, and then we could eventually be those people who are like, bonus content. So to review, we did, let's see if we remember, Masks,
Yep.
then School, then Netflix, then I did
Word.
the next one, Words.
Word. Yep.
And then we just did it. Projects and insurance. So if you had to drop, how should we do this? What is the first one you would drop?
I think I would drop probably insurance.
I could be okay with that. I would drop Netflix just because we basically agreed all the way through.
Yeah, and I would drop insurance because we disagreed.
Okay. How should we decide?
I think that
we could drop them both.
Yeah, we could drop them both, right? We were just gonna do 4 segments, so we could drop them both, or we could drop neither of them and force someone to listen to all of our thoughts. I guess that would destroy the point of our.
You know what? We're going to make the final decision later, so this will sound very different depending on what we decide. Well, David, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. I hope someone other than us does too, but even if not, it was worth it to me, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's one of my new projects.
3 stars. Upgrade to 4. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Zooming In. Hopefully we'll do more episodes. They might be totally different formats, so if you hate this one, just come back the next time. And stay safe out there. And don't hoard, but do buy insurance.
There we go. Thanks, guys.
All right, cool. So I'm going to stop recording on everything. As long we don't have anything else we need to record, right? We might just cut some stuff.
Yeah, I think we're good. And I've got it at 50.